Good morning.
Good morning.
One fun thing is to be able to say good morning. My church actually has services in the afternoon, so I'll say good morning and everyone will say good evening. I also used to live on the border. As you said, I lived in Alabama for 12 years. I lived on the border of Alabama and Tennessee. So when I would go to Tennessee, I would say, hey, it's beautiful in Alabama, and they would get offended. I want to thank y'all again for having me today. Brother Jeffrey asked me to tell a little about my tradition, where I kind of come from. I am the pastor of Open Arms Outreach Ministries in Virginia Beach. I live in Norfolk. I claim Norfolk. I like Norfolk. And the tradition we come from, and he was talking a little bit about it because he was on the internet, and I'm like, I come from a tradition in a church called the Affirming Pentecostal Church International. And what we were talking about earlier is that we actually have churches that are both in our fellowship that are both Trinitarian and Apostolic or oneness. So we actually have both type of churches in our fellowship. So that is something interesting about us. Personally, my ministry in my church, we started actually it will be 2 years, and we actually were just meeting in a little group actually at the LGBT Center in the Hampton Roads, and they gave us a little room, and we were meeting just 2 times a month, and we have grown, and we've grown out of that, and I'll be with them this evening. And so that's kind of our background. We are a church and fellowship that welcomes all people. We have people of all different races, backgrounds. We also have a special ministry to the LGBT community as well as to single mothers. And recently we just found out single fathers as well. So that's kind of what we do. And I send from my people welcome from over in Virginia Beach and Norfolk and all those other side over there. So I want to talk today about love in action. Now, one of the most overused and misunderstood terms today is love. We love everything. We love our cars until it breaks down. We love our neighborhoods until that bad neighbor moves next to us and plays music till 3 in the morning. We love our fancy new smartphones. We love our animals, even though they keep us up to 3 at night fighting with each other. And the list goes on and on and on. And I fear that this overusage of the word love has caused us today to maybe miss the true meaning and value of what love really is. Another problem with love that we have experienced now in our society is that we have this strange misdefinition of love that we've gotten from different faith or religious traditions. We have a misdefinition of love that we have seen today in this political season, where there has been this strange, unholy alliance between religion and faith and politics. And so we turn on the debates and we see people denigrate people of other races or denigrate Muslims or call for discrimination in the name of religion, and yet people claim that's love. As I said earlier this morning, when the debates come on, I turn on cartoons instead. I learned quite a bit more. Along that same line, some of us have been hurt greatly as well by maybe church or religious affiliations that we previously had or places where we went. In my congregation, I unfortunately have to endure over and over again people coming to me with horror stories and having to pray with them and hold them emotionally from where they've been mistreated and damaged in the name of a form of love. Some other examples of love that maybe, oh wow, God is calling. One example of where we sometimes get wrong on love is maybe that we have been in families or relationships where people have said they loved us, but they really haven't treated us with true love. Maybe we found ourselves being abused by someone who said that they loved us. Love in our time, in our society, has come to us on life support. But I have some positive thoughts about how we can bring love back. And I want to share just a few examples from my tradition. I want to look real quick with you at Matthew chapter 22, verse 36 through 40. This is Jesus talking, or rather his disciples talking to Jesus, as he says, "Teacher, which is the most important commandment of the commandments in the law of Moses?" Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest command. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. That is love." Now, if you've ever seen, of course, your Bible, it's a big, thick book, and you go down to Walmart and you look at the book and it's overpriced, and it's thick and it's heavy, and some of us, even in our families, they've got those big Bibles with the big face of Jesus that to me looks kind of scary, because and you have that family Bible, and you have that sitting there, and then Jesus messes that all up. Because he says that you've got this whole thick, heavy, expensive book. And it's all summed up in these two commands, which are summed up in love. Messes that up, messes up sales. There's another point a little bit later in the book of Matthew that tells us a little bit about the love of God. And Jesus says, how do we love God? And he says, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. How do we show love to God? By, again, showing love to our neighbors and our common man. This is interesting to me because you don't even have to believe in God to follow that command. Lastly, a little bit more about love and how to show love properly. Now, and when we start getting into defining and understanding love, we could sit here and debate for days and days on end. Or if you would like, we could sing songs about love. And we can, we sing church songs, and then, it's Sunday evening and you're riding home with your spouse and you're listening to the radio and you're singing songs about how love puts you out in the rain. And Tuesday I'm praying for snow, so love puts you out in the snow. Let me tell you, I want a day off. But I want to come and look at one specific section of Scripture that I believe can kind of give us a starting point for where love is. And I'll read this. I'll read kind of the first section as well. Again, from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. "If I could speak all the languages of the earth and of angels, but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had a gift of prophecy and if I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I have and sacrificed my body, I could boast about it, but if I didn't love others, I would gain nothing." Again, love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. Love does not demand its own way. Now again, we can practice this. If you're married, you hopefully should have a good practice with this part. Love does not demand its own way. When you're married, when your spouse tells you to do something, you say, yes, dear. It does not rejoice in injustice, but rejoices whenever truth wins out. I love that part. Love never gives up. Love never loses faith. It is hopeful and it endures in every circumstance. Now I'm going to give you 3 quick pointers. As a good Pentecostal, if you've ever been to a Pentecostal church, if you don't get 3 points, they're going to excommunicate you. I want to start with a story of an experience I had in my life with a friend back in Alabama, a friend I guess I have a broken relationship with, a broken friendship with. And so this friend was one of those very religious people. And so everywhere they would go, I love you, brother. I love you, brother. So one day, this friend met my spouse and shook his hand and said, I love you, brother. And, you're a good guy and I love you. And kept telling him that he saw him at a store or something, Kroger or somewhere. So then he comes back home and my spouse comes to me and says, your friend is weird. Because he came up to me and he shook my hand and said he loved me and all of this. But how does he really love me? He doesn't know me. He doesn't spend any time with me. He doesn't have a clue who I am. And oftentimes that's where love goes south. We have reduced love to empty words, but we never do anything with it. And unfortunately, I feel that friendship kind of fell apart because this person ultimately, had said that they loved me and they loved my family, but in the end, those words were empty because they never showed us any type of love. So number 1, love is an action word. From again that text there, 1 Corinthians 13, it talks about actions, not just emotions. Emotions sometimes can lead us in wrong directions. But listen to the words here that it says here. It's not just a mental exercise. Love is patient, kind, hopeful. It's not proud or jealous. These are words that demand a response. They demand action. They're not just something that we sit there and have a mental exercise, but they're things that require us to do something. I love listening how you all give to the less fortunate. That's love in action. Love must be done deliberately. It's not something that just happens automatically. It's something that we must do deliberately. Such as in the hymn that we read earlier today, or sung, that we talked about how we must love, and by loving, we must be able to love our enemies. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later. Number 2, love is a lifestyle. That means we must be deliberate in our love towards one another. Also part of that is we must unlearn certain things that are unloving. Now we would all, many times we would go and say, well, I am a loving person. Now I drove from Norfolk and I drove across the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, and this morning it was beautiful. The only problem was that there was like a 40-mile-per-hour wind, so my teeny little Suzuki is doing this. But if you've ever driven across there in 5 o'clock traffic, you understand that it's not that peaceful. People cut you off. And so what happens when people cut you off? You find out that sometimes you're not as loving as you would think. And you use those words that you tell your children they should never use. Let me give another example. We had at the LGBT center down there, they had a vigil or a prayer service where it was an interfaith service, and they wanted people it was right before the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage. And so what happens is they ask different ministers to come up and, give an inspirational statement or whatnot, or a prayer. So Reverend Jennifer from the UU Fellowship up in Williamsburg said we needed to lift up and pray for the Supreme Court justices. And she starts naming their names. And so, of course, there were some we loved, and there were some we were quite unloving towards. And so, as some of them we were up there, people were up yelling and yes, yes, and then it got to some others, and people were like, And she stopped for a second, and she said, and I pray today that God, you forgive us, because we're supposed to love even those who are unlovable and who are our enemies. And it was so interesting that we say we're supposed to love our enemies, but when we really are faced with real life enemies, sometimes our love fails. So we have to make it a lifestyle. We have to unlearn those thoughts and those ways that we have learned to be unloving. And then the last Pentecostal point. Love takes thought and contemplation. One theme I had been talking about is loving your enemy. One problem with that, and one dilemma that I ran into, is how do you love your enemy but yet not still allow them to hurt or to denigrate you? Now, you're going to probably ask me to answer that for you. And I'm going to say, no, you're going to take that home and think about that. Because that's a really difficult question. I know a lot of times, especially, from my tradition, a lot of, we would consider, from my group, we would consider ourselves progressive Pentecostals. But there's also fundamentalists. And a lot of fundamentalists will tell you, just have faith. But I would challenge us to go a little bit deeper, to really not just have faith, but to think and to contemplate. What does that mean to love our enemy? How do we do that and yet not allow ourselves to be hurt and denigrated? That's a difficult question. There are many questions in love and how we can love people around us. But above all, I want us to not just take it as a mental exercise, but to find ways that we can live out that love in actions. Because remember the old saying, actions speak louder than words. So above all, ask yourself as you go home, how can I properly show love by my actions? Thank you.